Managing your investments with Sagicor is now easy as ever. Contact your wealth advisor to update your personal information.
Good night. Welcome to Lead Story Prime. Tonight, two sides of the same crisis. The government says it's managing Jamaica's recovery from the worst natural disaster in the country's recorded history with fiscal discipline and hard-won stability. The opposition says the fiscal response at this time is inadequate, the institutional architecture absent, and the window to rebuild is closing. Both sides have cited numbers. Tonight, we test them. Here's what is not in dispute, though. Hurricane Melissa caused total losses, estimated by the Planning Institute of Jamaica at US $12.2 billion, 56% of this country's gross domestic product. The government's allocation for Melissa recovery in the coming fiscal year is 30 billion Jamaican dollars, less than 1% of the GDP. The opposition says that gap is a policy failure. The government says it's a fiscal reality. Tonight, we're also asking what the opposition's alternative is and what it actually costs. Mark Golding delivered a budget presentation today that covers energy, healthcare, education, land, agriculture, roads, workers' rights, housing, and more. It's a comprehensive vision, but a vision without full costing is not a budget. And tonight, we'll press both sides with equal force. The questions we'll be putting on the table before this panel tonight are these. Is Jamaica under-investing in Reconstruction? And is the opposition's alternative financially credible? Who is legally running the recovery? Is a fiscal strategy on either side preparing Jamaica for growth or for another cycle of austerity? I'm Jody Ann Quarry, and this is Lead Story Prime. Inside Lead Story, we are going to be making sure that you can better understand what it is that happened today. And we have been having budget presentations since last Tuesday. So, Favour Williams, Minister of Finance and the Public Service, went first, opening the budget debate. Then last Thursday, we heard from opposition spokesperson on finance, Julian Robinson. And today, continuing the budget debate, we heard from opposition leader Mark Golding. We'll be now handing over to Akeem, who will be helping us understand the budget debate as it continued in Parliament today with opposition leader Mark Golding.
Good evening. Before we enter the political argument, we need to establish the numbers, because tonight's debate is not simply about taxes, housing policy, or political philosophy. It is about how Jamaica finances recovery after Hurricane Melissa while preserving fiscal stability. And the disagreement in Parliament today comes down to three competing interpretations of the same economic moment. First, the government's position that Jamaica must protect the fiscal discipline that has established the economy over the past decade. Second, the opposition's argument that the government is pursuing that discipline through the wrong policy choices. And third, the the economic question that ultimately decides the debate. Which approach rebuilds the country faster without de-establishing the public finances? Here are 5 facts that frame that discussion. Point 1. 2 major institutions have assessed the economic impact of Hurricane Melissa. The World Bank estimates physical damage at approximately $8.8 billion, about 40% of Jamaica's GDP. The Planning Institute of Jamaica, the PIOJ, which includes economic losses and recovery costs, places the total national loss at $12.2 billion, roughly 56% of GDP. In the current budget, the government has allocated 30 billion Jamaican dollars for reconstruction in the coming fiscal year. The opposition argues this allocation is too small relative to the scale of the disaster. The government's likely response is that reconstruction spending typically occurs over multiple fiscal years rather than a single budget cycle. Point 2. Since 2016, approximately 114 billion Jamaican dollars has been transferred from the National Housing Trust to the Consolidated Fund. The throne speech indicates that an additional 57 billion Jamaican dollars is expected to be transferred through 2031. The opposition argues these withdrawals weaken Jamaica's housing system. The government maintains they were necessary to support broader fiscal stability during a period of economic adjustment. Point 3. The policy debate takes place against a significant housing challenge. Hurricane Melissa destroyed an estimated 24,000 homes. Jamaica's broader housing deficit is estimated at nearly 200,000 units. The National Housing Trust currently constructs about 2,300 homes annually, which raises the policy question at the center of today's debate. Should the NHT primarily finance housing expansion, or can it legitimately support the national budget in times of fiscal stress? Point 4. After Hurricane Melissa, Jamaica temporarily suspended its fiscal rules, but the Fiscal Responsibility Act permits that suspension for only 2 years, which means the deadline to restore the rules arrives on April 1, 2028. At that point, Jamaica must return to the legislated public debt target of 60% of GDP. The decision made in the next 2 fiscal years will determine how difficult that adjustment becomes. Point 5. The government's revenue package totals approximately 29.4 billion Jamaican dollars. The opposition argues these measures were unnecessary and that removing them would increase the debt ratio by only 0.44% of GDP. That claim will be one of the key economic questions examined tonight. So the debate ultimately comes down to one question. If the government removed the new taxes and the NHT transfers, how would the same fiscal gap be financed? That is the question the panel will examine.
Thanks so much for that, Akeem. That was Akeem. All right, going through everything we need to set up our conversation tonight as we look at the opposition leader, Mark Golding, and his contribution to the 2026-2027 national budget. Now, in studio and online with me today, I have a number of people who are best placed to help us have this sort of excellent discussion. Let me bring in my panel here inside Lead Story Prime. Starting off on set with me tonight, Senator Cleveland Tomlinson, Deputy Spokesperson for Productivity, Efficiency and Competitiveness for the People's National Party, joining us in studio. Representing the Jamaica Labour Party on the government side, we have Vice President of Generation 2000, Newton Harris, and we are joined by 2 independents as well, helping us tease out what it is that we're hearing. First off, we are joined by independent economist Dr. Chris Stokes here online, as well as social and political commentator Dr. Nadine Spence. Good evening to you all, and thanks so much for joining us inside Lead Story Prime.
Good evening. Thanks for having us.
Good evening, Jody. Thanks for having me.
It's important for us to have this conversation. Jamaicans are watching these budget debates. They're like, why you can't just have one day? Well, it's important for us to have the teasing out of all of the positions of all the sides and to give us as much as possible. Let me start off first, though, with the people who are impacted, because Westmoreland, St. James, Hanover, St. Elizabeth, 5 months after Category 5, Melissa, they're still dealing with it. The evidence of that wrath still remains. 250,000 buildings damaged, 24,000 houses completely destroyed. Total losses of US $12.2 billion, and that's more than half of everything this country produces in a year. The government says it's managing recovery responsibly within fiscal constraints that protect Jamaica's hard-won stability. However, everybody doesn't agree. The opposition says that the fiscal response right now is inadequate, and that window to respond aggressively, well, that's shrinking by the minute. Both positions will be tested tonight. Newton Harris, we start off with you here as you join us online. Are you, yes? Well, we're making sure that we can continue to get him safely in. So let me move on then on set with Senator Tomlinson, who is on set here with me inside Lead Story. As the Senator on the side of the People's National Party, somebody who is concerned about productivity and efficiency, you are in the business of numbers. The opposition says the $30 billion that has been proposed by the government to fix the gap is insufficient. Julian Robinson last week told this program on Friday that the alternative involves financing the gap through Treasury bill issuance. That's some of the things that he is saying. You have the digital nomad tax, you can have all these other things, but the PNP specific reconstruction figure, what does it cost to borrow it? And how does the opposition reconcile additional borrowing? Especially since Mark Golding again said borrowing wasn't taxing wasn't the way. How does it square that with a commitment to fiscal responsibility?
Right. I think it's very important for us to appreciate the context in which we are. And the context that we're in today is that the economy is expected to contract significantly. Given the impact of Hurricane Melissa, the productive capacity of the country has been severely hit. And the challenge that you have now is that you have a tax base that has been eroded. How do you respond as a government when you're faced with this kind of fiscal crisis? Do you present a response that worsens the problem, or do you present a response that pushes against the problem? We think that it is suboptimal a choice to impose taxes on a population that is already financially distressed. In fact, I'm an economist. That's my background and that's my training. As an economist, will tell you that in this kind of crisis, you do not pursue pro-cyclical measures, meaning you do not pursue measures that reinforces a very same problem. Remember, I said the problem is that your tax base has been eroded because the productive capacity of the country has been significantly impacted. What kind of measure do you pursue then? You pursue counter-cyclical measure, meaning you push against or you move against the problem. So you need consumer demand to rebound. So you need people to have the disposable income in their pocket to make a sufficient demand that will contribute to the productive capacity.
And your position and the position of the opposition is that that is not going to be possible with the current tax package that has been put on the table by the government.
Because you are burdening a population and you are burdening a tax base that's already eroded. You need to give the tax base the time to recover.
Well, I think that's so important to then start off our conversation, especially given that we heard today from the opposition leader himself, Mark Golding, inside Parliament. We'll tease out what it means to hear the opposition's position from the boss himself next inside Lead Story.
The seed for potscapes was planted many years ago when by chance I acquired a few succulents and there was a gap in the market where persons were actually looking for a wide variety of succulents as well as guidance in succulent care. So I went through all the required steps to make the business a reality. The vision of Potscapes was to be an online plant store. To do so, we required an e-payment gateway. Sagicor Bank's e-payment system was very reliable and was a perfect fit for our business. My business blossomed when we established a storefront at 29 Upper Waterloo Road. My Sagicor business bankers supported me tremendously in the early stages and continue to do so. I received solid advice as how to navigate the business processes and to positively impact others through plans.
The internationally acclaimed On Stage with Winfred Williams.
At a new time, Saturdays at 8 p.m. on CVM TV.
So much more than entertainment.
Thanks so much for staying with us inside Lead Story Prime. Tonight we're taking a look at what the opposition and no less than their leader had to say about the budget presentation that had been put on the table by Minister of Finance and the Public Service Favour Williams last Tuesday. It had been placed in Parliament from as early as February, and now we're looking to see what has changed, what has not, and if global factors are now impacting things. Let me move to Dr. Chris Stokes here, who is online with us as we have a full conversation about the budget. Dr. Stokes, independent of both sides, JLP, PNP, NEP, when a country suffers damage to the equivalent of 46 to 56% of its gross domestic product, was the international evidence from comparable disasters tell us about the minimal fiscal response required in that initial period, that first 12 to 18 months, to do what it is that Senator Tomlinson complained of, that economic contraction, and more critically, compounding the problems?
All right, let me address those things. Let me start by saying, first of all, that we are not going to recover fully from Melissa's damage in one fiscal year. All right, it's not going to be all the money that is needed is going to be spent in 26-27. So let's get that out of the way. There's two more things I want to mention. Senator Tomlinson is absolutely right in that, generally speaking, as an economic theory, if you take money out of people's pocket when they need that, having it in their pocket allow them to spend, to buy groceries, to pay rent, then you run the risk of contracting the economy. When the economy is already contracting because of Melissa, and I don't expect that to be long term, we do have our productivity problem, which we can speak about later. But that is not on the face of it helpful. But there are two nuanced situations I'd like to share. The first is the fact of the tax being applied does not in and of itself mean that the contraction will be worsened, because it depends on how the tax dollar is spent. If the tax dollar that is collected from the individual is spent by the government in a wasteful way, then yes, that is going to be contractionary. If, however, that dollar collected is used for capital investment, for investing in things that will grow the economy, then the argument becomes more nuanced. So now you get down to the argument: does the government make better investment decisions, or does the individual make better decisions? Are there things that the government needs to do to drive the economy that the individual cannot do? And therefore, overall, an argument may be made that the government should collect the tax, make the investment, and over time the country generally will be better off, and that's an open discussion, and there's no settled position on that in economics. On the other thing that we must bear in mind, though, is that Mr. Robinson's recommendation that we collect more taxes that are already due, while it is not a new tax.
The more efficient system that he's proposing with the tax administration, Jamaica, something I pressed him on last Friday, and there's a costing problem around that, given that's been a proposal on the table for more than a decade, not yet, though, implemented.
But we should implement it, though. But that's a different discussion. Not yet implemented, but and it's not going to be implemented for 26, 27, but it's a very good idea, something that we should pursue. But the point I want to make on that is the electronic invoicing system will, in effect, have in actuality have the effect of getting more money out of businesses' pockets into the government, which, and an argument could be made that will then lead to a contraction of business because they are paying more money to the government. But as I said before, it depends on what the government does with that money. So I see all of this to say that as I sit here, not arguing a political position, I think we need to be very careful about us analyzing what the measures are and what the expected effects of those measures will be. And I just want to make this, it's not a simple black and white, but we have to think the things through and make a decision on what our philosophy is. Is the philosophy government-led leadership or government-led growth, individual-led growth, and take a position from there? And we have certainly seen well-articulated different positions from the government and the opposition over the last couple of days.
All right. In that space, then, Dr. Nadine Spence is where I bring you in, because this is a discussion about social and political responses now to something as horrific as Hurricane Melissa and a global crisis as well that we're watching. And you observe both the policy and the politics of what has been said. Mark Golding, opposition leader, today cited a cascade of what he considered to be human cost statistics. Functionally illiterate children, overcrowded hospitals, depleted housing stock, workers trapped on rolling short-term contracts, the government pointing to debt stabilization and a falling murder rate, though he said as evidence of progress. Dr. Spence, when you look at the social data, this is your area that you play in, not the fiscal data, not the money that the people here are talking about us. Which narrative more accurately describes the lived reality of more Jamaicans 5 months after Melissa? And is even a party offering a response that is proportionate to that reality?
Well, it's a good place to be in a way if you're crafting a narrative that is going to get you support from the population. I think it's good to be on the opposition benches right now, because given what has happened with Melissa, given what is happening globally, and given the reality that Jamaica finds itself in, it's difficult for you to find a positive narrative to input into our current reality as you talk to Jamaicans about what is to come. So I think the opposition has information that they can use to propel their narrative forward of an uncaring government, of a government that is more focused on macroeconomic stability than it is on people suffering and pulling people out of poverty. A reality that Jamaica finds itself in over a number of decades, where we have talked extensively about slow growth, low productivity, the gap between the rich and the poor, widening inequalities. All of those are narratives that fit into a party in opposition with the PNP's leaning. So I'm not surprised at the leader of the opposition's presentation and the inputs into that narrative. It falls well within the rubric of the PNP. That's generally the argument. So, I mean, that is par for the course. I think what we have to assess as well as we look at how the PNP has framed its narrative is whether or not there is any radical shift, I would think, for this moment as Jamaica deals with the reality of a hurricane that is the worst it's ever seen, and a political and economic moment that is being compared to the 1970s and the oil crisis. I don't know if those two factors were considered as much in respect of a path forward. I know the reality of Melissa and the post-Melissa reality pertaining to the people who were most affected would have resonated with a lot of Jamaicans. I think even today I was having a conversation with a woman who is still grappling with the idea of homelessness because she cannot fathom how she's going to earn enough money to build a home of her own. So people who've been impacted in that way, people who are still living in certain conditions post-Melissa reality, they will connect with the message because in many respects, and Dr. Stokes said it earlier, the recovery is not going to happen within 5-6 months after the hurricane. People are not going to just press a button and go back to normal. So it provides good information for the opposition to speak to a government that is uncaring, again, fitting into how the JLP has traditionally been described. Government more focused on fiscal responsibility, more focused on balancing the books rather than balancing people's lives. We've heard that before. So, as you rightfully said, the narratives are out there. What we are doing is assessing which one is more effective. And as you rightfully said, we have more presentations to go to say, this party we think carried the narrative more convincingly than the other one. At this stage, I think that the PNP has scored some solid points. I think Julian Robinson's presentation the last time had a lot of people talking. I think today it wasn't necessarily different from what we would have heard from the leader of the opposition. There was nothing in his presentation that jumped out at me in respect of the budget part of it as alternatives to fix the problem. So at this point, I don't know. I don't know if it's. I think it's PNP one, but not on the side of the governments here, but definitely not on the side of the leader of the opposition. It would have to be from Julian Robinson.
All right. Well, with that feedback, let me just allow Senator Tomlinson to quickly respond before we take a break and then hear more fulsomely from both him as well as Newton Harris, who is on set with us now representing Generation 2000 as its vice president and on the side of the Jamaica Labour Party. Senator Tomlinson, before we take a break.
2 points of response. One for Kristen and one for Nadine. But I'll start with Nadine because I think she said the most inaccurate thing in her statement a while ago. When she said it's part of the course that the PNP would speak like this, she's been a bit disingenuous because what she's doing is discounting the lived realities of the people on the ground. When the PNP speaks, when the leaders spoke about what the people are experiencing, we didn't pull this from a hat. We didn't huddle somewhere in a corner and make this up. We engage with the people. These are the lived realities of the people. So the people.
I'm not discounting that. I'm just saying that the PNP would lead into that is what the PNP would normally do.
Nadine, don't interrupt me. I didn't interrupt you. Allow me to speak. Right. So when she said that, she is seemingly detached from what the lived realities of the people are. So I think that what she needs to realize is that what the leader of the opposition said today was a representation of the fact that people 5 months out of the coming out of the hurricane have not seen any material move by the government to resolve some of the issues.
And the response to Dr. Stokes?
Right, and the response to Dr. Stokes is the argument that he made would have had merit if we were operating in a different jurisdiction with a government that demonstrated the capacity to spend the capital budget. So the question is, who should spend? Should the individuals spend or should the government spend? Well, the government has demonstrated that it's unable to spend the capital budget. In the last 3 fiscal years, it has repurposed the capital budget and directed it to current expenditure. And he would appreciate that it's the capital expenditure component of the estimates of expenditure that drives growth. On that matter, I think the government has not demonstrated its capacity to spend the capital budget. I would keep the money with the people and allow them to demand and allow that to drive improvements in the productive capacity of the country.
I think this is then the crux of the conversation between the government and the opposition, and we'll continue it inside Lead Story Prime here on CVM Television.
Your journey with a Jane Bank Small Business Loan, with small business loans with as little as $10,000 and up to $4 million.
The time is 8:30.
I'm me, the stylist, no scam and not style me.
From the market to the farm to the office, money talk is everywhere. But are you making sense or nonsense? The Bank of Jamaica brings you common sense with BOJ. Real stories, real laughs, and real lessons to help you protect, grow, and manage your money. Mattress savings.
At least my mattress. No charge me to sleep on it.
Partner plan.
Remember last year we needed our payouts early? But Miss Pam gave it to her cousin first.
Or a sketchy loan flyer.
Electrifying deals.
See why making the right financial choices is pure common sense. Brought to you by Bank of Jamaica, empowering everyday Jamaicans one episode at a time.
Grandpa, it's 2026. You can't keep hiding all your money in every single pocket forever.
What a guan?
What a guan?
That a guan, pa.
What a guan?
What a guan?
What a guan? Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 10 p.m. on CVM TV.
That a guan, pa. What a guan?
Thanks so much for staying with us inside Lead Story Prime here on CVM Television. We're discussing what the opposition has put on the table. The figures, the facts, and the analysis coming from opposition leader today, Mark Golding, as he made his contribution to the budget debate. I have with me a whole cast of amazing people to be able to help us with that. And we now have on set with us Vice President of Generation 2000, Newton Harris, joining in the conversation as well. Big conversations going on here, but one of the most pressuring points that has been raised about the NHT transfers, Newton Harris. It's been something that before becoming Prime Minister, Andrew Holness described the transfers as bank robbery and committed to ring-fencing the institution under his government. Jamaican $114 billion, though, so far has been withdrawn. The throne speech extends the extraction not till next year, but until 2031. A further $57 billion to be taken out. The government's argument is that these transfers have been managed within the NHT's capacity, but we have lots of houses that have been lost. What do you do now with the core of NHT's housing program now that we have $171 billion to be taken from the very housing institution that should be building houses all the way up until 2031?
I think, but first of all, let me say thanks for having me again. I think the NHT issue is a very complicated issue. When those remarks were first made by the Prime Minister, I'm not sure, well, by the now Prime Minister, I'm not sure that the circumstances are the same. We're not comparing like for like. I think in the context of Jamaica's worst natural disaster, that people will understand that if we can get the income, the revenue from there, non-tax, that we don't impose any more hardships on the Jamaican people through taxes, that if the money is already sitting in the fund and that we can draw down that it is justifiable to do so in this circumstance. And I think people understand that quite well.
But it's a continuation of taking money from the fund at a time when Jamaicans are also complaining about affordable housing and saying that if you have this much money to be able to take on a yearly basis, building a budget around the possible money that you can take, you can build more.
Well, the issue is also a supply side issue. So there's an argument which is quite convincing that if the money were left in the fund, it would not be of much use in any event to the fund itself because of the challenges in delivering housing units. So there would be more money chasing less houses, therefore inflating the cost of the houses in general. The issue is on the supply side that the contractors seem not to be too interested in the low-cost housing solutions. Because that brings in a lower revenue for them. But however we can work on the supply side, that's where the issue is. But for now, I mean, there have been arguments that I've heard as well about decreasing the contribution until you can use the money. I'm not sure if
Dr. King, Dr. Damian King has made that proposal saying if you have so much money building up there with no purpose, give the people a tax break in their pockets on a monthly basis by not having them pay. What do you say to that?
That's something that we should look at. I agree that that's something that we could look at. That is a good idea for consideration. But for right now, the funds are there. It is a source of non-tax revenue that would not hurt the Jamaican people directly in their pockets this year. And I think that it is just justifiable in this circumstance.
Senator Tomlinson, though, the NHE transfers began in 2013 under a PNP administration. Mr. Golding today called for their immediate end, but there's a fiscal arithmetic, some would say that your party has to answer, that the PNP introduced the transfers and the PNP's alternate budget involves additional borrowing, something now that the JLP is able to avoid by saying, let's tap this resource that we have on hand. And Mr. Golding's speech today includes dozens of programs that sound great, nice, very nice, without full independent costing. How does the JLP credibly end the NHT transfers, say you have a problem with them, finance the reconstruction gap that you say isn't properly financed, and fund its manifesto without either new taxes or a level of borrowing that creates a next fiscal crisis?
Well, first, you need to clarify why the PNP had to impose the withdrawal from the NHT in the first place. The country was in a disastrous position. We were on the precipice of economic collapse. We had to renegotiate the IMF agreement because of how badly the previous JLP administration dealt with the international financial community. The IMF imposed on Jamaica the highest primary surplus ever imposed on any country that had an arrangement with the entity. And because of that, they created a significant need for us to generate revenues. When we did it, it was supposed to be a short-lived measure. It was supposed to end in 2017, and the JLP continued it. Now, the question you have asked, if you were to end the withdrawal of the funds, where would you get the money to fund the budget right now? The reality is that the money should stay in the NHT, and it should be used to build low-cost housing solutions. And Newton touched the issue carefully. He did express, he did reveal, he did confirm that there is a significant gap with respect to what the government is supplying to the market in terms of housing solution. We think that there's much more that can be done by the National Housing Trust. When we engage with the people who work inside the entity, when we talk to the people who engage with the entity as an external stakeholder, they tell us that there's a lot more that can be done, that the projects can be executed on a rapid basis. And we think that when you actually deploy that money that you would have taken from NHT into the creation of houses, the sort of economic output that will come from that, the revenues that will be generated because of the scale of people you have to employ to build houses at that level. We think that the construction worker who gets money, we think that the other persons who get income from this will be redirected into spending, and you get to generate that through indirect taxation. So when we have done the math, we think that the money that you leave with NHT, when that is actually deployed into the creation of houses, and then the economic multiplier effect that flows from that will result in the generation of indirect taxes. We don't think that it is a challenge to borrow the additional money. And I know that you're saying, that the Prime Minister, the JLP is saying, they avoided borrowing in this time. When we did the numbers, the additional borrowing that we are projecting would lift the debt to GDP ratio by 0.44 of 1%. it would not move it. The government projects 65.7% by the end of the 26-27 fiscal year. If we were to borrow, the deficit of the PNP would create, if we were to not impose taxes and end the withdrawal of the NHT, is around $15 billion. When you borrow that through the issuance of treasury bills, it moves the debt ratio by less than 1%. I think that is an acceptable movement. That cannot and would not jeopardize your credit rating. I work in the financial markets, so I have a general appreciation of what the S&P, what Moody's, what Fitch is looking for.
Global credit rating agencies that are also looking at and assessing Jamaica prior to the hurricane, after the hurricane, and seeing if we are maintaining the sort of fiscal discipline that we went into this period with, and then seeing how we move our way out.
It would be hard-pressed for anybody to argue that a movement in the debt to GDP ratio of less than 1% is an abandonment of fiscal discipline. No analysis can indicate that. So we don't think that the concern that is being loudly shared is warranted.
All right, let me move to Dr. Chris Stokes here, because the building of houses is one thing, but the reconstruction of Jamaica is a big thing right now. And a lot of this budget is meant to start that process of reconstruction. But in the opening of budget presentation last Tuesday, it was noted that Minister Favour Williams didn't mention that big organization that should be responsible for the rebuilding, the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority, NARA. She didn't mention it once. Today, though, Mark Golding named it among 5 critical pieces of legislation still not passed. The government's position is that reconstruction is proceeding through existing mechanisms. But the opposition has said that without statutory powers, those mechanisms are insufficient. For you, Dr. Stokes, as we look at what NARA is supposed to be doing, but though it has no enabling legislation, no statutory powers, no institutional mandate, we had Senator Tomlinson saying that we were underspending capital budget last year, and now this bottleneck with houses for NHT. Are we going to have to ramp up in time?
Well, when is in time? You know, these
same people that Dr. Spence talked about, the people grappling with homelessness, people dealing with that.
No, intractable. Let me just comment on a couple of things. First of all, in the idea of the NHT and let me start with the borrowing. It is a little surprising to me that the Labour Party would not have gone to borrowing directly. It says to me 2 things: that A, they expect that they're going to have to do other borrowing, which we are not clear on yet, perhaps around the international financing to reconstruct. Perhaps that is it.
256 billion.
Perhaps that is their reticence. To go into the market to borrow. No, we have to see how that goes. But if it is just the point, as the senator said, the 0.44 day, and say, what is the issue here? The other issue, though, which again, just frankly speaking, in the last couple of fiscal years, the Labour Party has been doing some innovative things to finance the budget and proclaiming somewhere every year no new taxes. That's a win. And I think that the time has come where there may be a realization that there has to be some new taxes, and that this particular move provides the opportunity to set a new tax that may be increased over time, or entirely new source of revenue without any of the gymnastics, forward selling earnings, present value earnings that's coming in the future.
And that's referencing the securitization of the 2 airports.
All of these things that have been done. So maybe that's a little bit of a mystery to me, but those are possible explanations. Now, on the issue of the housing situation, I'm particularly concerned about that, and I'll tell you why. Without doubt, it's tempting to take the 11.4 billion. It's there, and to make the argument that there's a supply issue. But again, sitting from where I sit as from an economic development perspective, I'm not, I was not happy about the initial borrowing in, was it 2012?
2013.
13 when we had the renegotiation. I wasn't happy about that. And here is why. If there is an issue on the supply side, if there are market failures, and I'm not a big government intervention person, we are going to need some taking off autopilot and some industrial policy within the economy that will deliver houses to people.
Well, then, Dr. Stokes, let me hear from you on that after the break. Let me take a quick break here inside Lead Story Prime, continuing this discussion with Dr. Chris Stokes, Dr. Nadine Spence, Senator Tomlinson, and Newton Harris inside Lead Story Prime on CVM Television.
Let's delve deep into the issues. We'll take you beneath the surface.
Greetings and salutations. My name is Orville Higgins, and it's another edition of Fan Central.
Talking to the people at the heart of the top sporting stories. Hear from your favorite sportsmen and women and the administrators who work tirelessly to make it all happen. It's live sports talk.
I've written an entire article.
Yes.
Looking at all the major issues every Tuesday at 9 p.m. It's Fan Central.
As we close out our conversation tonight about the budget presentation made by opposition leader Mark Golding as he made his contribution to the debate today, we're also assessing what the government has put on the table and what the opposition through Mark Golding as well as opposition spokesman on finance Julian Robinson has said. Before the break, we were talking with Dr. Chris Stokes, who was talking to us about his concerns with housing and why we weren't seeing enough houses. After Dr. Stokes, I'm going to go round robin with my guests because there are hot button questions that we have for you all before we go. Yes, Dr. Stokes.
Quickly. So I know there are issues with supply. I know there are issues. There's supposed to be some sort of inflationary issue, which frankly I'm not sure I understand entirely. What I do know is that, and I hate to say it, but there may be a role for the government, properly structured, in building these low-cost homes, getting families into the homes, growing the middle class, creating generational wealth, because we are in Jamaica's history. The way that you create generational wealth, you make yourself wealthy, where you pay off your mortgage and you borrow the money, you send your children to school, and you borrow the money back, and you start a business, or you start the business out of your garage, and all of these things are built around the home. And I think that it's a disservice to the country and to economic development not to double down and find a solution to the issues around why are we building 2,300 homes a year when the deficit is 200,000, A, and B, what the market failure that allows us to go into private enterprise construction that drives up the prices, that puts it out of the very reach of the persons who are making a contribution. And I think if there is ever a case for government intervention in terms of the construction and delivery of the homes at a certain price, then as much of a capitalist as I am and a free market person as I am, I think that this is the case because it creates wealth at the family level and is the basis for national reconstruction.
All right, so you're even willing to then say perhaps some intervention by the government in this particular area.
Yeah, I think it's too easy to say take the 11.4 billion.
Good. So then let us then say what it is that you all have seen tonight and what it is that you want us to leave this conversation with. Because before we close, I want to throw a final question to each of you. I'm giving you all a short bit of time. I know it would clearly be something that we would want to have more conversations on. But 60 seconds, direct answers. Newton Harris, let me start off with you. The government has defended every fiscal choice tonight as responsible stewardship in a post-Melissa economy. But responsible stewardship is judged by outcomes, not intentions. If in April 2028, the fiscal rules that we've suspended return and Jamaica's housing stock is still broken, something that we just heard Dr. Stokes talk about. NARA still has no legislation, so all the building isn't happening, and GDP growth is still negative. Will the government own that as a policy failure, or will Melissa be the answer?
There will be no policy failure as far as I'm concerned. NARA will fix a lot of the issues. There will be legislation, I'm sure it's already on the way, and that will be something that Jamaica has never seen before. That will be another first. So we know after previous disasters, there has been some an ad hoc office or project team set up out of the OPM. NARA will be properly resourced and instituted, and that will channel local and international resources in a way that there's precedent for it in other jurisdictions. After Katrina in New Orleans, in Japan. So I'm sure the government is already looking at all of these examples from the jurisdictions. It will be properly done to mobilize resources, and I'm confident that there will be success.
So you're saying that there's no policy failure, and Melissa won't then have to be the answer that we look at in 2 years as to why things haven't been done?
I'm confident. And some of the other issues highlighted by the opposition leader, the tax compliance, that has already improved year on year. I think it's a good idea to look at the digitization. Digitization is a big focus for Jamaica, not just this government, but certainly on this administration. So I think if we can digitize, and for the ease of doing business, if business owners have less steps in order to get their returns and their things over to THA, that might be a welcome thing, especially for younger people.
All right. Let me just tell you that the 60 seconds, I have to make sure everybody gets there. Senator Tomlinson, let me pull you in. Dr. Golding, or rather Mr. Golding today delivered a comprehensive governing vision, you might call it. But as an opposition senator, you know that visions require financing, especially the economist in you. The full cost of the PNP's policy manifesto today has not been independently costing. The fiscal rules return in 2028. The window is closing. What's the one thing the PNP can force the government to do from the opposition benches before that deadline? And can the PNP guarantee they cost it properly if it were sitting on the other side?
Yeah, we would not erode the fiscal discipline that we have worked so hard to achieve. In fact, the foundations were laid by us. We did the heavy lifting to get the country where it is now, to restore the macroeconomic stability that the country has largely enjoyed over the last 10 years. And I think it's important to note that many of the proposals that were made by the opposition leader today don't require financing. But beyond that, they are not proposals that all would be implemented within a single fiscal year, which would then invariably pressure the government's budget. These are policy proposals that would be rolled out over a full term, as he has indicated. So I think we have to appreciate that there is significant work that needs to be done to improve the lived realities of the Jamaican people. And the fundamental argument that was posited today, reinforced by the leader, which was said by our opposition spokesman in finance, is that there was a better alternative available to the government in terms of how it responds within the current fiscal year. The government looked at a revenue gap, and no one is denying that the hurricane would impact government's revenue collection. But the government looked at a revenue gap and chose the easiest, less innovative and less creative way, which invariably pressures the most vulnerable in the country. We looked at that revenue gap and we said that the people should not be burdened further when the hurricane has impacted them so significantly.
I think that is a good summation of what the opposition leader's speech was today, and also echoing as well a lot of the key points shared by Julian Robinson, opposition spokesman on finance, last Friday with us inside Lead Story when he sat and talked to us about it as well. Dr. Spence, every budget debate produces analysis. Very few produce change. The people most affected by what happens between now and April 2028 are not in this studio tonight. They're in Westmoreland, St. James, and Hanover, still waiting. In your assessment, what would it take, not fiscally but politically and socially, for Jamaica to be genuinely different by the time the next major storm arrives? God forbid, not anytime soon, regardless of which party's in power. Dr. Spence? Dr. Spence?
Sorry, I had muted myself.
Yes.
One of the things the leader of the opposition said today that I wholeheartedly agree with is the whole business of resilience in our housing stock going forward. How do we use this as an opportunity to do things differently so that we're not as vulnerable as we were before? I don't know that we are seeing that being reflected in the rebuilding efforts, and I would love to see if we really saw this as an opportunity to make ourselves more resilient in respect of how we build, in respect of how we farm, in respect of how we build communities. One of the things that struck me post Hurricane Melissa is how difficult it was to organize communities for response, because so much of what is particular to communities. I'm looking forward. It slipped me just now. A nice political word I learned long time. Much of what comes naturally from the people in terms of leadership had died down, wasn't there, so that when you try to go into a community, there wasn't a natural community leader. There wasn't, people. It didn't evolve the way one would have hoped it would evolve if there was a community structure.
And is it something that we can build now, Dr. Nadine Spence, perhaps?
We have the SDC, we have the Social Development Commission, we have JCDC. That is what those organizations were built for. And so there's a way that we have to reorient these organizations that were built and give them some different directives in terms of engaging people. They have the structure to do so. Parish council, all of them.
And I think it's important then
that is going to guide their intervention.
And I think it's important then that you put in context the sort of breathing of life that we have to have into these sorts of social avenues.
Exactly. We have the organizational structures in place, we have the legislation.
Yes.
We're
completely out of time though, Dr. Spence, as we have this as we have this conversation, it is clear that there's a lifeblood and a heartbeat to the Jamaican society that is clearly in need of recovery, just as we recover physical stock and reconstruction after Hurricane Melissa. We had Inside Lead Story Prime tonight. Senator Cleveland Tomlinson, Deputy Spokesperson for Productivity, Efficiency and Competitiveness for the Jamaica Labour Party, representing the JLP, the government side, Vice President of Generation 2000, Newton Harris, independent economist Chris Stokes, and social and political commentator Dr. Nadine Spence. Thank you all for joining us tonight inside Lead Story Prime. Up next, Van Central.
Lead Story Prime, Budget Special, brought to you by...
Managing your investments with Sagicor is now easy as ever. Contact your wealth advisor to update your personal information.
Let's delve deep into the issues. We'll take you beneath the surface.
Greetings and salutations. My name is Orville Higgins, and it's another edition of Fan Central.
Talking to the people at the heart of the top sporting stories. Hear from your favorite sportsmen and women and the administrators who work tirelessly to make it all happen. It's live sports talk.
I've written an entire article.
Yes.
Looking at all the major issues every Tuesday at 9 p.m. It's Fan Central.
internationally acclaimed On Stage with Winfred Williams.
At a new time, Saturdays at 8 p.m. on CVM TV.
So much more than entertainment.
Yo, this is Governor representing of the CVM, you know.